Essentially, what New Rome is the spiritual rebirth of a military caste, a military elite in a sense. But it's not like we both said, we're not getting stuck in this sort of esoteric view of caste and class. This is something that through your indomitable will is what shapes and forms nature. It's what shapes and forms life. It's like you said, the master shapes his environment, the slave is shaped by his environment. Hello, everybody. I'm joined here today by the General of Lance's Legion, General Lance, good friend of mine. A lot of big things on the horizon, as some of you who are more related to the project know already. But we have a lot of big things being planned. It is an auspicious day. The omens are looking very good for a fortuitous campaign. The gods are with us. Mars sends his signs, Jupiter sends his signs, and thanks for coming on, Lance.
Salve Legionaries, and I'm glad to be back on. Absolutely, I think we we spoke briefly about, or maybe just gave a little bit of a teaser about our project coming up called New Rome, and we got a lot of positive feedback and inquiries regarding that topic, and so we felt that we'd shoot the shit. And Sergeant Barnes is menacingly sitting in the background here, always with me. NCOs are always, backing you up uh, whenever you're not looking, so it's always good. But we just wanted to make sure that we're talking about this project and fleshing it out, and just shooting the shit about the, I guess, general zeitgeist and perspective in general. Excuse me. I'm a little bit
Absolutely.
confused today. I don't have it. I'm getting the shakes. I don't have my Jim Beam with me today. I need it.
Yeah, I know, and Sergeant Barnes does too. Otherwise, he's going to shut down. He's not going to be able to function properly. But
Yeah.
yeah, so in regards to New Rome, one thing that I think people want more than anything today is that sort of all-encompassing. You said the zeitgeist, right? People want something that transcends all these sort of petty identities today. For most of human history, the great struggle of life has been wanting great struggle and then overcoming great struggle. I was doing a little bit of writing the other day. This might turn into an article. This might turn into a book. We'll see. But I like to talk a lot about radical aesthetics, and I was writing about beginning with the Bronze Age and then the Heroic Age. How in a lot of ways I see it as the beginnings of different struggles through each historical epoch. So, for example, so I'm going based on Hesiod's um, sort of Ages of Man, where he talks about, I forget if the Golden Age or the Silver Age comes first. Do you know?
It's golden, then silver, and then bronze, and then finally iron.
I guess that would make sense, right? So yeah, so yeah, the Golden Age and the Silver Age, especially in the Golden Age, you have the primacy of nature over man. In a lot of ways, because the Hellenic pagan faith is pantheistic, the gods are almost a reflection of nature. Man is sort of non-existent in terms of influencing the greater sort of movements within history. So, of course, you have the reign of the Titans and eventually the gods defeating the Titans and taking over. So, during those two ages, man is very insignificant. He doesn't play a major role. And I think primarily what is so important about the Bronze Age and then the Heroic Age afterwards, I think it reflects man beginning to sort of triumph over nature and the beginning of man's struggles with each historical epoch. So, the Bronze Age, for example, I believe Zeus rebuilt man out of an ash tree or something like that, and man became more warlike. He became more violent, and with the ideas of beginning to be warlike and violent, you also have this will to exert your influence over the world around you, whether that's people or nature itself. So the Bronze Age becomes the sort of training grounds for the Heroic Age, where you have men like Hercules. You have guys like Bellerophon. The story of Bellerophon is a literal triumph over nature. It's this hero who tames the wild Pegasus, right? And I think that's a great allegory for the first struggle of man, which is first overcoming nature. It's first becoming strong enough and becoming autonomous enough that their actions begin to influence even the actions of the gods. Whereas, earlier on, it was just the realm of the gods, just the realm of nature, so to speak. So the great struggle of the Heroic Age becomes man's triumph over nature, man beginning to take primacy over nature. And then we get to the Iron Age, right? And then the Iron Age, at that point, you really don't have a lot of whether it's in mythology or real life. It's like this is pretty much the realm of man now. It's become an arena for man to sort of find his glory. The gods are almost a second thought once you get to the Iron Age, whereas even in the Iliad they were more important, and before the Iliad they were even more important. And the Iron Age to me is interesting because it's not an ideological struggle between different ways of life. It's a struggle between all the military castes of the world, essentially fighting for primacy over each other. Whether it's the Celts, the Germans, the Romans, they were all the military caste, and it's interesting. I don't want to rant too much, but that's the struggle of that epoch. It's a struggle of different military castes. But today, and maybe this began with the fall of Rome and religion sort of beginning to be the first ideological battle, whether it's the Christians and the Muslims or whatever. But like as you go throughout time and you start to have the military caste replaced by the merchant class, you no longer have this just arena of competing wills. It starts to become ideological struggles, almost struggles over petty distinction. So you go from the historical epoch being defined by man versus nature, man versus man, and now it's like, what is this historical struggle today where essentially I think it's between a return to something vital and the catatonia induced by the sort of spiritual neurosis that we talked about of the modern bourgeois society. And that's very wordy. Maybe that sounds like a word cell thing, but do you sort of get what I'm saying? Like, what is our struggle today?
Yeah, like I get what you're saying, and I know that maybe to our listeners we kind of took a little bit of time to kind of go around and explain it, but really what's happening is you're going around with people who are dead inside, and then they want the world to be just as dead as they are within, and people who are alive, who are fighting against the encroaching death. To put it in perspective with the cycle, I think it's just, every cycle is a cycle, right? Time is a flat circle. Well, in the Iron Age, to be able to go through from iron into gold, you have to go through this period of immolation, right? The purification of iron. And for those of you who are not into hermetics and all this kind of esoteric stuff, I think it's important that you understand how much it is that the idea of turning iron into gold is, and also the other implications of fool's gold and so on. And what they mean by this is not returning to an age of merchant class, which is what people usually associate gold with, bourgeoisie. No, no, no. What they're talking about is a time of spiritual, untarnished beauty, right? Because gold is unable to be tarnished, right? And that's why every sequential, I guess, era of time, you go from an untarnishable metal down to a tarnishable precious metal, finally to bronze, which is extremely hard to polish and make beautiful, and finally, of course, iron, which is wrought from the earth as this putrid thing. And that ultimately we're in this period of time in which people are making decisions, and it's just like that Ragnarok kind of situation where at the end of time there's this battle of the gods, the higher and the lower, the Titans and the Olympians, right? And ultimately iron must be made into gold through the furnace of this conflict. Hence why the only way to get that spiritual, I guess, how do you say, experience from life is by engaging in the battle, that which makes our soul elevated. And the only way to do so is by acquiescing to a higher principle, giving yourself totally to something above yourself, to understand that your soul is goes beyond simply your metal, your physical body. It transcends. I've lived many times. Okay, I was there 2,000 years ago. I was there. Okay, and I will be here 2,000 years from now, and so on. And you have to understand that this life particularly means everything and nothing at the same time. It can mean everything as far as when you devote yourself to a higher spiritual plane and to the purification of your soul. So as you go through time, your soul slowly transmutes from iron into gold. I know that sounds esoteric, but the basic idea is that you're not living for material goods like the bourgeoisie does, or for base satisfaction. You're living for something greater. Hence why I always talk about pain. Most of our enemies, they make pleasure and pain avoidance their god. I make pain and war and conflict and flame. Those are our gods. That's what New Rome will be wrought from. And from every single soul that transmutes from iron into gold will be another brick in our Rome. Does that make sense?
Based as fuck. Exactly. And, you know, I think all that to say, we live in a historical epoch where there is indeed a great spiritual war, right? You see it in all our media, like in terms of, you know, Fight Club, for example, they literally say so. You know, we have no great war, it's a spiritual war. And I think the way that we sort of bring this into the New Rome conversation is because essentially what we're trying to do is it's almost a transvaluation of all morality in a sense because the modern morality is dominated by this sort of post-enlightenment egalitarian ideal, and it's a very subversive egalitarianism because you know they want to make it seem like, oh, you know, everybody's equal, we're all entitled to this certain level of existence, but it's a very anti-nature concept. Something that people always like to bring up to me is like, you know, the whole Rawlsian, was it John Rawls? He has that theory of justice or whatever. You familiar with
I
that?
know of him. I know of him. I haven't read his stuff. I just know that he's a shitlib, so I just
Yeah,
don't read his stuff. Yeah.
yeah, but I do deal with a lot of shit libs, and they like to bring this up. The Rawlsian theory of justice, or whatever, is essentially that you have to live life thinking that you could be like the most unprivileged person, and you have to like create society so that they still have it okay. And my counter to that is always, you're born a human. There is a base inequality that exists and is almost a priori. Like, we are born humans. To be born a human, you are born with a heightened mental capacity uh, above all other beings. Like, you have to realize, like, we kill billions of livestock animals every year. You could have easily, like, statistically, the fact that you're a human, or even the fact that you're a human in, like, you know, a first world country, is so astronomically low. The fact that your fucking sperm cell was lucky enough to, you know, get into that fucking egg, it's so astronomically low. So it's like you've already won some sort of lottery just being where you are now. And that's why I don't like this whole, oh, well, what if you were born like this or that? Well, first off, you're born a human. If we're going to account for all injustices, you know, all inequalities, then you have to range that to something that even goes beyond humans. Well, you know, our whole livelihood depends upon inequality. It depends upon literally domesticating and enslaving these animals, right? Inequality is everywhere. It's in nature too. Without civilization, without domestication, animals, you know, massacre other animals. Ant kingdoms literally go to war and destroy entire colonies. This is life. Life is war, and life is inequality. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, and Nietzsche talks about this, the whole morality of modernity is all centered around trying to even the playing field because it's being evened. The playing field is being evened by people who cannot actually take the field themselves. They cannot win an outright combat. So things like egalitarianism are leveling the playing field so that the weaker person can now sort of bridge the divide with the stronger, you know, and we both know this. But I think the great spiritual war of today is that we see that the ramifications of this morality is, you know, degrading art, degrading quality of life, and also the degrading quality of the human type as well, and a very dysgenic society.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this is why, with very few exceptions, I don't read leftists because, in general, they all proceed from the same a priori assumptions of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, namely, is, basically Nietzschean ressentiment, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
basically freaks and botched and bungled individuals who want to destroy higher beings because they can't possibly. It's like an existential crisis. It's like, imagine you're at a school full of chads and you're the only cuck there, and there's no way to get Stacy's, and the only way to live with yourself is to basically, first of all, invert what the principle of nature is, and just to say, well, you see all those chads there, you see they're just losers because they don't understand I'm a winner, okay? And some 30 years down the line I'm gonna get a Stacy, okay? That's exactly how it usually goes. And I mean, Nietzsche, they hate Nietzsche, and you see this from the left now, that they try to, especially through Deleuze, incorporate Nietzsche into their wider philosophy, but it always falls apart because either the philosopher goes down two routes: either it completely breaks with Nietzsche, or they end up becoming right wing, or
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote right wing, which is to say aristocratic, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction. And for instance, Pierre de la Rochelle, for instance, was a great example of a guy who started off as a socialist and then became, right wing. Whatever, Mussolini, whatever it may
Yes.
be, Sorel. And I guess, I want to psychologize, and if you can give me just a couple minutes here, because it's
Yeah.
really such a critical point of view. You can talk about philosophy and the implications all day long. You can talk about, how you are not exactly consistent or consistent. You can argue all day, but ultimately who you are and what type of philosophy you choose is a reflection of who you are already. And that's your body, right? And ultimately this is what Nietzsche always comes back to, is that song, aesthetic choice in view, how you choose to live your life, all this stuff comes down to aesthetic predilections that are basically a song sung from your body. Okay. And if you notice this, this is why I have one of my missions, right? Is that I only read Ernst Junger, for instance, at the height of his powers. I only read his books when he was writing them, when he was a young guy with, full of ambition and drive. I only read uh, texts from people with strong bodies, strong minds, and a strong soul. When they get older, that's when you start seeing people decay, and that's when people start putting out crap. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so I guess I want to take it all the way back to Rawls, and he's talking about, I guess, what is it? Power maximization of those who are oppressed.
Yes.
And it reminds me of this really stupid mental mind game that you used to encounter in middle school and I guess elementary school. And basically, it went something like this, where you could choose society A that wasn't quite perfect and things were kind of messed up. There's usual crime, but it wasn't like society B. And listen to society B. Society B is perfect. It has a utopia, but there is this one individual who is locked in a dungeon from birth, neglected.
Yeah.
All types of terrible things are happening to this one individual.
Hmm.
And can you live with yourself? And I remember answering or not my professor, but my teacher, and I said, I don't care if everyone is down there so long as I'm on top. And I think it wasn't like that I'm legitimately saying that. It's
Yeah.
more that it was just like a fuck you. Like, this is a very stupid way of justifying mediocrity,
Hmm.
and I guess mentally manipulating people into denying what life is at base, right? And what is life at base is the competitions of wills to power, right?
Hmm.
And this manifests differently for different people. And for those of you who don't understand what will to power is, it's not strictly political, okay? It's not like, everyone wants to become a dictator or something, or a general of a legion. Well, I don't know. But what I'm saying is that, legion is about, I mean, excuse me, what is the will to power is about, for instance, I want to be an artist and being able to outcompete. It's the agonal characteristic of life, that you're
Hmm.
competing against other individuals to make your wills manifest. Think of yourself, for instance, if you have experience going into a forest and you see little tree saplings trying to grow and sprout amid old trees that are taking up and hogging all the sunlight. Well, what happens is those little saplings, they die, and because they don't have that exposure to sunlight. Now nature doesn't confer a moral duty or end to that. Nature simply picks who is stronger. I mean,
Hmm.
it's actually wrong to say that. Nature confirms who is the strongest, right?
Yes. Hmm.
Nature, by its very nature, it is what it is, right?
Hmm.
And I know I'm kind of winding a little bit, but here's the the crux. Here's the crescendo. There is no moral paradigm. What is a morality except morality? All that morality is a choice of how you manifest yourself,
Hmm.
how you want to see yourself and in the world. Leftists are correct that you could be anyone. You can be anyone, but in the sense that you choose to be in line with who your nature is and bring that to its full fruition. Become who you are. That is what I believe in, because I was born as a tiger. I wasn't born as a cow or something like that. I'm not a herd animal. I won't diminish myself by trying to ape their ways of life.
Mm-hmm.
I was born to be a predator, and I love my friends who are themselves wolves and kings of men, leaders, and that have sharp teeth and razor claws. I have so much hate for the herd because they don't have the power to actually destroy us. What
Mm-hmm.
they do have, just like the Jungle Book, remember that little snake that would hypnotize your eyes until you're eaten? Same thing, but this is what the herd animal does. Is when you listen to their justification,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's really important to emphasize the slave, right? The
Yes.
helot, they're not stupid. In fact, in the Roman Empire, it's probably very instructive that there are many slaves who rose to very high station,
Mm-hmm.
who were actually rich, right? They had monetary wealth, they had an incredible acumen, mental acumen or otherwise. You had gladiators who were fighters, but
Mm-hmm.
they were slaves. But you must ask yourself, what is the delineation between a slave and a free man? What is the delineation between a helot and a citizen? And this is why we call it New Rome. And the attitude of Romans is that ultimately, at some point in their lives, these slaves chose life in servitude over
Mm.
death.
Yes.
And this is why Cato the Elder, for instance, when he attempted suicide and ultimately failed at first because his friends basically restrained him,
Mm-hmm.
they left him alone, and then he tore out with his bare hands his intestines, disemboweling himself and killed himself
Mm-hmm.
because he would rather be free, die a free man with honor, than live as a servant to
Mm-hmm.
Julius Caesar.
Right.
And that is the difference. And that's why communists are like cockroaches. You don't understand that these people, they will exist because they will destroy themselves, they will live through anything simply to go on and exist. But you and I, we're different because we're not yeast, and that creates such a massive tidal wave of resentment because of every single I guess infraction or pain or humiliation they experience in their life. They look at us and realize that they chose that end, and that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately they need to destroy us because ultimately they're the ones that were too weak to choose death
Yeah.
over like what they call life. I'm sorry if I ranted a
No,
little
you're
bit, but
good.
I'll
I
throw it back to you.
Yeah, I have a lot to unpack there. And, really quick. Our first conversation we ever had, we touched up on this, and it's also important to bring up what you brought up at the time. Is that sometimes you have to weigh in. Well, do I fight to the death or do I bide my time? Right. And that's an important thing to ask yourself. So, for example, right, we talked about if all hope is lost and your whole family is going to get massacred or enslaved or whatever, there's no hope, and you fight, you die fighting for ideals. But then there's also the Count of Monte Cristo path, where you plan your revenge over the course of years. You prepare for the attack once more, and you see this historically as well. A lot of times, actually, where for a while you're down, but you're not defeated. You're down, but you're not out for the count. I mean, even in European history, you look at the shifts in power over time. Uh, Napoleon comes back from Elba. Germany comes back in World War II. You have a lot of these sort of biding their time. Yes, they are defeated, but they're not out yet. So that's another thing to think about. Is like, at what point do you accept death and you say, all right, we're going to fight to the death with honor? At what point do you say, okay, we still have a chance? Let's
This is a
yeah.
This is a great question because I know that the lines are squiffy. I'm giving you an extreme, right?
Yeah.
It's let's the Romans had this attitude because they were exposed to this circumstance outright. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't lie or anything. And so, think you're a Gaul in your village and suddenly, your village is surrounded, everyone's killed and you have the choice between the sword or slavery. Well, that's a very clear choice. You chose
Yes.
slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And a certain extent, I think Arminius is a great example of a man who was actually basically a hostage, so AKA
Yes.
slave,
Mm-hmm.
but basically ended up wreaking revenge.
Yes.
And there is a simile in Japan, which I like is one of my favorite. I'm not a weeaboo or anything. I think it's really cringe when people do
Yes.
like I don't know whatever the katana thing, but like this is the one one of the two things that I really love of Japan, I like Imperial Japan from, the Meiji Restoration all the way through, till 1945. And I love this story of the Ronin. And the 47 Ronin, basically the ethic for Bushido was that if your lord was killed in battle, you should commit seppuku, which is, suicide, and join your master out of, shame.
Mm-hmm.
But what ended up happening is their lord, I think is their shogun, right, died at the hand of a rival, and they chose instead to bide their time, live in shame for a year, become dissolute, live as pimps, just depressed and all this like lame shit. And then they come back a year later to the day, and in a surprise attack, they take this rival shogun, they kill him, decapitate him, and before the eyes of the emperor, they commit seppuku finally. And so they restored the honor of their liege lord and themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a certain sense, of course, these men were slaves, right? They chose slavery, but not really. Why? I mean, I know this sounds like splitting hairs, but ultimately it's a matter of intention. It's a matter of what you choose to do. The Rawlsian type, the Zizek, the Kami type, what their attitude for living in slavery is to destroy everyone and bring them down to their level.
Yes.
The difference between us and them is, though we are, you and I, subjected in a form of soft slavery,
Mm-hmm.
what we intend to do is restore the natural order and bring back the emperors and the Caesars and the kings, and bring back what's highest in each and every man and woman, right? And
Absolutely.
so we're trying to raise up people, whereas they're trying to destroy people. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense? So it's
Yeah.
about ends as well.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And this is, we talked about this in our first talk as well. This comes up in Twilight of the Idols, and it's an important distinction to make, right? So you're absolutely right. We have not. It's like I said, we have lost, but we're not defeated. We lost some battles, but the war still goes on. And this happened. You bring up Rome, for example. They didn't just fold after Cannae. The memes, the famous, the popular memes today, and I love them. Is like, Hannibal is all old and shit. He's like, why won't you just die? And it's like some Roman guy, like, we just raised another bunch of legions, round 17. Let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's fucking go.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. And I want to take the conversation back because you made a lot of good points earlier that I wanted to touch up on. And really quick,
Yeah.
are you sure that I'm starting to wonder? You bring up Stacy, and the school full of Chads. I'm starting to wonder if Sergeant Barnes watches Uber Boyo and is doing some sign language right now, because I remember that one video where Steph's always talking about Stacy and that exact thing that you brought up. Anyway, it's a fun tidbit. But anyway.
Yeah. You go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, in a lot of ways, what you described there is almost what you see with a sort of merchant elite taking primacy over the military elite. Because it's the primacy of money, an abstraction of value, taking over what is actual value, which is generally martial ability and martial virtue. So it's interesting that you say that. And then I want to go back as well to this sort of very naive leftist view of nature. And I did a video recently where I was talking about the distinction between Hobbes and Rousseau. And the distinction is important because Rousseau is he's sort of your proto-Marxist. I don't know if I'm using the word correctly. Proto's before, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
right.
good. So yeah, proto-Marxist. Rousseau sees man in the state of nature. He says some things that are technically correct. He says man is generally healthier when he's not subjected to a grain-based diet, that he has healthier, stronger bones. Sure. But he also says that man is this peaceful, amicable creature, and like it's only through property and through culture that he is corrupted, and then that he, wages war, which is super naive. I mean, even in the animal kingdom, you see chimps have all-out wars, and of course, it's very primitive wars. They're not brave like a man going forth and accepting death. They're generally hitting the other ape a few times. Maybe one of them dies if they can gang up on one. But, war is all around nature. And it's a very naive thing that Rousseau thinks of as man is only warlike because of these, what he considers artificial constructions like culture and property, whatever. Whereas Hobbes is like, no, like man in nature is as savage as man in civilization. And in fact, you do need some sort of order. And, maybe Hobbes' view of the state isn't quite what we think, but I think he has a lot of interesting perspectives, right? And it's this distinction of the left and the right, is that the right is nature and the left is anti-nature, and you see that in that distinction between the two of them. But going off that, I just wanted to touch up on that very quickly. Um, you know, there's a very interesting thing in terms of the relationship with lower castes. And we've talked about this before. One of the distinctions is respect, and it's also how do you play a role in this hierarchy. And it's important to say that even though you and I, right, we seek to be a part of that sort of military caste. We want to be that elite. It is not out of disdain or hatred for like, the lower beings. In fact, their opposition to us is out of disdain and hatred. Any disdain and hatred that we possess is because of people that represent values in opposition to our own. So that's, of course, the master and slave dichotomy. And what I want to bring up is, you've seen Seven Samurai?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant example of this is that these peasants, right? They're not these stupid, modern shit libs being like, oh, you have to do this for me. I'm entitled to this and that. No, they're very meek, and they are peasants. They are slaves essentially. Like, they don't have that sort of higher will, but they understand that their place in the hierarchy. So they go to these samurai, and they're very respectful. They're very courteous. They know that the samurai are in a position above them, so they lay themselves at their feet. They lay on the ground and beg for their help, right? And it's important to make the distinguish that we ourselves understand the role of the lower castes in our system, even in the hierarchy. We ourselves are not them, but when they show respect, when they play a role in constructing the sort of greater society, like, you need builders as well as architects, you need followers as well as leaders, right? Not enough chiefs, too many Indians, and vice versa. Like, you need a good balance. So it's like, the problem is that this respect, this relationship with the lower, often gets subverted into pity, and that's where you have this whole sort of cult of victimhood that you have today. Is that people start to believe that this protection is something they're entitled to, but it's not. It is a relationship that is built because the lower serves the higher in one respect or another. They show respect to the higher. They help with the menial tasks, which allow the higher to pursue warfare, to pursue art, to pursue the sciences, to pursue wisdom, and use that to protect the lower. And there's this, like, symbiotic relationship, but it's not really pity. And I see this a lot today, is that people don't understand what pity really is. People will say, well, some kinds of pity are okay, but then it's like the things that resemble pity, that are positive, are not actually pity. It is an understanding of symbiotic relationships. You see this in nature as well. Sometimes the alligator will open his mouth and he'll let the little bird clean his teeth, but he's not doing it out of some kindness or out of some, sort of justice that this little bird is entitled to. He's doing it because it's a symbiotic relationship. And that's how we should view things that resemble pity. You should not feel pity. You should understand that people play a role, and that part of that role is understanding where you place in the hierarchy. But no one's entitled to some sort of justice. It all happens because everybody's contributing to something else. That's when the relationship is proper. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there are many. I guess the most illustrative example would be to talk about Hinduism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that there are castes and that these are a reflection of spiritual attainment over many lifetimes. And I think it's really important to understand that no matter how high you are in the art in the caste system, it is always understood that you started at the lowest of the low. And I don't even mean as a human being. You started as a bug,
Yeah.
right? And then you basically, over time, through virtue and consistent effort and spiritual knowledge, you slowly went through the caste progression and ultimately became a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you started, there's the lowest. What the enemy is not necessarily like these people aren't naturally inferior in the sense they're always doomed to be so. It's just it's like we're a team, all of humanity, especially our fucking like our your nation that you come from is your family and it's your team. The issue that the enemy is basically what the Marxists called lumpen proletariats, right? They're basically this kind of like, it's not even just dysgenic, it's just like these people who use all their faculty of mind and body to destroy the balance of the universe
Mm-hmm.
because almost out of this like hatred of the situation. And I know that sounds kind of like maybe quote unquote esoteric or like funky or whatever, but I'll just break it down simple for you. What it is basically people, you see this in the Bolshevik Revolution, nobles, right, trying to
Mm-hmm.
play savior, have a savior complex, nobles who are communists, and then of course they get fucking whacked. But death doesn't really mean much because we reincarnate. But what matters most is that they betrayed not simply themselves, their family, their nation, and the universe, but they offered an affront primarily to nirvana and to their higher spiritual attainment. So what they did is a regression. So ultimately, next life they'll be born less. And I believe, and I know this sounds far fetched, but I believe that the rising tide of these communists in our generation came from men who betrayed themselves and others
Mm-hmm.
because they wanted, I guess, to recuse themselves of the truth, of
Yeah.
higher spiritual truth. And so they come back in these misshapen forms, which emanate or emulate what they did in their past lives, and they wonder why. And so they insist on their errors. And so ultimately, I believe we will win because they're on their path downward and we're on our path upwards.
Yes.
Further, I think the other thing too is that in this time, there is no such thing as like castes anymore. There are
Yeah.
just simply those who go up and those who go down.
Right.
And that ultimately everyone who serves that universal principle is a warrior to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll train your fingers to fight and your heart to be courageous, okay? So I guess I just wanted to bring it back and make it known in a kind of celestial, maybe universal spiritual sense, the delineation between us and them.
Mm-hmm.
What is the fight for the future, and that ultimately it's like Arjuna, right? We're in a
Mm-hmm.
place of Kali Yuga, and we can't really necessarily affect too much, but that which is within our control, our spirit, everything within ourselves, we can control, and
Mm-hmm.
it is the way that you become a better individual through your life, man or woman, no matter how high or low born you may be. It's about acquiescing and pursuing that mission. Life is a spiritual event. Live that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that I'll leave it there, but I kind of want to throw it back to you just in case you had any questions or comments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like you said, and I want to make the distinguishment as well, is that when I do talk about hierarchy, right, I think a lot of times certain people, if Vola to a certain extent gets lost in this sort of metaphysical view of hierarchy as this sort of static thing, right? And I am of the belief that, especially historically, war has always been that sort of grounds in which certain people born of a lower caste or born lower in the hierarchy distinguish themselves and eventually separated themselves as higher beings. So I don't see class and I don't see these castes and hierarchies as something that's just static and unchanging. Through action, it's like you said, like all humanity was at one point this little organism, not even a bug, like be it like even smaller than that.
Amoeba.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like we all come from the same thing. What distinguishes us is the will. And the will of the slave is not that he is actually always going to be a slave. It's that it's almost a self-imposed slavery, right? Like obviously there's physical slavery, whatever, but ultimately it is the mind that dictates whether someone is truly free or not. And ressentiment is essentially self-imposed slavery. It's the belief that one can never distinguish themselves higher in the hierarchy, so they feel that they have to bring down the master. And war historically has been that thing that evens the playing field in a good way. So the difference between like sort of this bourgeois, or not even bourgeois, but like this leftist egalitarianism and natural competition is that the egalitarianism of the left is self-imposed. It's anti-nature, but nature has its own form of egalitarianism, and that's survival of the fittest, survival of the strongest. It's not egalitarianism. It's just who is the brightest flame, and that's what war is. And you see this throughout history. Many of the great figures in history were born, whether it's this middle class or even a peasant class. So Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who likely would have been the shogun potentially, or at least his son would have been the shogun. Of course, a lot of shit ended up happening. The Tokugawas ended up becoming the family which held the shogunate. But Toyotomi Hideyoshi was in charge of Japan after Oda Nobunaga. He was born from a peasant class. the Sengoku Jidai period saw the most samurai rise up out of the Civil War because these peasants, who had the will to be something more, would fight in battle and they distinguished themselves in battle and they rose in the hierarchy, they rose in the caste system. Magnus Pompey was a plebeian. Now it's funny because the plebs ended up supporting Caesar and the patricians ended up supporting Pompey, but Pompey himself was a pleb. Napoleon was from a middle class family in Corsica. When he moved to France, he hardly even spoke French. He was not this guy born to the aristocracy, and of course, he is on the side of the quote unquote left during the French Revolution. Obviously, it's a lot different than the way we use left and right than it is now. But Napoleon was not some guy born into the perfect situation. Plato talks about, and I'm not take Plato with a grain of salt. He does say some good things once in a while, but obviously big critique of the sort of post-Socratic, Platonic
Yeah.
Greek morality. But he talks about the gold, silver, and bronze father and the gold, silver, and bronze son, and how the bronze father can have a golden son, and how that golden son must be elevated to become a guardian if he himself is born and becomes greater than the status of his birth. So what I'm getting at here is that there are ways up, right? It's like you said today. There's not really a caste today. It's like who wants to go up and who wants to go down. So I just want to distinguish that I don't see this hierarchy or caste as something that is just always the same. You can distinguish yourself. You can rise. It's through your virtue and through your effort, through your Andrea, your manliness, like and just vigor. You can rise.
Agapos. Yeah, of course, and I believe that as well. I think it's an important dynamic that most people really overlook.
Hmm.
They overlook because I think Jefferson was right. As much as I disagree with whatever, I think ultimately he was right about the aristocracy of merit
Mm.
and the idea that you are who you are by what you do and who you choose yourself to be by the will. And do you affirm your nature or do you not? And I think this really frustrates a lot of leftists because a lot of leftists, you know, their attitude is I am the way I am because of my environment.
Right.
Well, they've just outed themselves as basically um, I don't know. They just outed themselves as basically slaves because they
Hmm.
are a consequence of their surroundings. They're not, um, you know, the shaper of their location. And I believe that, people that are naturally warriors and masters believe their environment to be a product of them.
Hmm.
And often it is the case. I mean, this is borne out in leadership principles and studies that the human will, agency in general, has a strong correlation and effect with your environment, what you do with yourself, and there is just no such thing as a disadvantageous location. I mean, especially in real life, obviously at extreme ends, that kind of doesn't make any sense, but I think it's important to understand that, in natural life, heuristically speaking, that is true.
Hmm.
Um, and I wanted to return as far as like just to talk about things in general here is, you know, I was just thinking to myself, how do I say this? I mean, like, I think ultimately people get hung up on esoteric aspects of like, oh, what spiritual caste you are, blah blah
Yeah.
blah. Like that's all bullshit. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It's been destroyed. Like the only thing that is left for us to do is to do the right thing right now, and we know what right looks like. We know that there's a universal principle. We know what virtue and vice is. I mean, it's a universal thing that you can see over many different cultures. We understand which ones profit, which ones don't, and I think just being true to your nature. And of course, different peoples have different mores, and that's like the nomos. But what I'm talking about is the physis, right?
Yes.
People whose vices and virtues descend from nature. And that is the difference, is that you make yourself ugly by subordinating yourself to the hut, right?
Hmm.
The longhouse. You make yourself beautiful when you live in concert with nature. And this is not to sound like some hippy dippy bullshit, like as if nature is some, benign, benevolent mother goddess thing. Nature is a fucking slut bitch. Sometimes she will fucking kill you for no reason. You'll be someone's prey the first day. She's completely arbitrary. And then at the same time, she'll succor you and love you and cherish you, and she's the most beautiful thing and loving thing.
Hmm.
Nature is a woman because of her changeable nature, for changeable being, you know. And so I guess I don't know. I didn't want to like rant for too long. I hope this kind of disgorges a lot of what I'm thinking in my mind upon the world, upon you legionaries. I smear my vesicles upon you. Okay, but what I'm trying to say, man, is that ultimately it's up to a choice. It's up to a choice. Who you are is who you choose to be day after day, habit after habit. That's Heraclitus for you. Mic drop. Boom.
Based. You know,
Yes.
I think I want to pull it back to New Rome a little bit. Obviously, we said we are going to talk about New Rome. I think the legionaries deserve to hear the plans on future campaigns a little bit.
All right. All right.
Just a brief
Let's
tidbit.
crush it.
Indeed.
Let's crush it. Okay.
So
Check.
yeah, I think we sort of outlined what's going on today. That we live in a great spiritual war. So now the question is, how are we going to fight that war? Well, you fight that war by training soldiers, training warriors. You do it by setting up the logistics for future campaigns. You do it by creating doctrine and by developing small unit tactics, everything. And New Rome is going to encompass all of that. And I guess just briefly, if we can sort of discuss the bones of or the foundations of what this is, and I'll let you say your piece in a second. But what I would like to say is that essentially what New Rome is the spiritual rebirth of a military caste, a military elite in a sense. But it's not like we both said, we're not getting stuck in this sort of esoteric view of caste and class. This is something that through your indomitable will is what shapes and forms nature. It's what shapes and forms life. It's like you said, the master shapes his environment, the slave is shaped by his environment, right? You are born with certain talents, and those talents do matter. But it's like you see it in fighting, right? Sometimes the person who has the indomitable will, who goes to the gym every single day, he may not be the most naturally talented, but through his will, he turns that will into a talent of its own. Will is also a talent, right? And what we want to create, and what our mission is essentially, is creating the sort of left and right lateral limits, as you said, of what it means to be in this new military elite, this new military caste, and with it, a new culture, essentially. What we're doing is we want to return to the primacy of a specific form of life over another in terms of who dictates where society goes. Society is run by merchants today, and it's been run by merchants roughly for 200 years. And what we want to do is we want to reverse that, and we want to return the leadership of the world to something more vital, to something that falls in line with nature. And when I say falls in line, I don't mean that in a sort of limiting way, but in terms of finding the positive aspects of nature that demand savage excellence of man, that create beautiful art, beautiful innovation, and not just this sort of consumer art and consumer innovation that you see today. Nothing new is being created. You are creating things within the bourgeois world that make life more comfortable. It does not heighten life in any way. And our mission is to create this new culture, is to train warriors both in mind and body, to give you something that you can be a part of. And that will include teaching, that will include actual physical action, actual meetups. Like I want to eventually have actual meetings, people coming together, whether it starts off as once a year and going and shooting guns together, going and sparring each other, going and just, drinking in the woods and smoking cigars and pipes and talking about, the past and the future and the present. This will be a real vital thing, but it will begin with small steps, as all good campaigns are. We will first draw out the logistics and supply lines, so that will begin with simply having a platform where you and I can talk, you and I can expose our ideas to other people and give them something that they can be a part of.
Yeah, I think it starts. I guess the answer is it starts within,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a gay way. Like I'm not talking about, your 6 hour morning routine with some freaking idiot influencer. I'm not talking about, going to a church and doing a ritual or having some weird icon on your wall, some weird shit like that. No, no, no. It's applied philosophy, and that's what Nietzsche talks about. You can't just think about these things. Though thoughts are important, actions must consecrate thoughts. They must follow, action must follow your words, right? And so it starts with you going to the gym, becoming physically fit. With that physical fitness comes discipline. With that discipline, you apply to other exercises or exigencies of your life. So you become a better man. You choose to live by JJ did Ty Buckle, justice, judgment, dependability, initiative, decisiveness, etc. You choose to be a leader and a good follower. You choose to be a father, brother, sister, brother, whatever the fuck, everything. To be in good faith with your friends and to destroy your enemies without mercy. That is the fundament of our city, right? That is the core. That's the forum. That's the temple of Jupiter. But every sacred act is consecrated by action, and it starts with physical fitness, it starts with mental fitness, and it starts with spiritual quote unquote fitness, which is to say affirming what right looks like, right? Which means, knowing, for instance, that I don't know, maybe like paraphiliac shouldn't be like teaching kids or something. That's fucking wrong. We
Yeah.
all know that. We've been to Afghanistan. We know what they do with the little boys. We
Hmm.
don't want that here, okay? So it starts within, and then it starts fleshing out. Everyone has their natural proclivities. They have their nature. They have their, obviously their lives have different opportunities and shortcomings. They have to operate within the operational constrictions and limitations that they were given. All right. Some of you aren't born to be quote unquote warriors in the natural sense, like with a sword or a rifle or whatever. And that's more than fine. But that will be your foundation. And from that foundation, what you'll go on to do is either business, if that's what your calling is, or art, or science, or, if you're so bold to go on and make a military career, or etc. But the general idea of everything that we're doing starts within and slowly emanates outwards. Ultimately, our plan is not simply to just be on the internet, it's to actually occupy real space and form it to our vision, to make real Rome happen in real time. That starts with palestras of, temples of worship in a certain sense. What you call worship is just idly sitting down and thinking about something. What I call worship is action. So these places will be gyms. They will be MMA, Spartan type camps. They will have libraries and resources for people to achieve higher mental abilities in whatever calling they may feel is the one that they want to invest themselves in. And as well as the most important thing is fraternity with each other. So basically, you legionaries, there's a reason why we're a legion. We're only so good as the man to the left and the right of us, correct? And so ultimately, the plan is to create fidelity and to create not what you call community, but actual brothers who will bleed for you and fight in the same principle. And the idea would be this: like over enough time, it's not simply this beginning. That's just the beginning, right? These palestras are just a seed. We'll start branching out into other businesses, kind of Yakuza style, start taking over stuff
Yes.
in a legal way, of course, a very legal way. Um, Thank you. And of course, what we're going to end up doing is creating a caste of men and women who are born to leadership of their respective countries, nations, etc. And with this superior caste, good leadership will happen and then bleed down. Everything is about, leadership is always, there's this like thought and leftist thought that everything is grassroots, and it's actually the inverse. The iron rule of oligarchy is always top down,
Yes.
and the way that you shape the world is by having good leaders, and that's precisely what Lance's Legion is about. It's not simply creating warriors; it's creating leaders, commanders, people who will change the world for the better. And will be able to rule over those who need that assistance, because 80% of people, they are just floating through life. And what happened, and that's fine, okay? Most people are sheep, and that's not a negative thing. We need them to be who they are, but they're now under the influence of people leading them astray, and they are suffering for it. They're not having children, which is probably the most poignant example of a unvirile population. When people stop having kids, that should be a huge red flag.
Yes.
When people have skyrocketing depression, just as they've had since 1980, that's incredibly bad. When people devote their entire lives to money over, the deeper questions of life, so material over the spiritual, and spiritual being action, not the material gain. So the issue with the merchants is that they will destroy themselves. They'll clip the coin of their souls so that way they can make a little bit of extra money. But what ends up happening is that over time, the generation after generation, and even in their life, their body and their soul reflects the emptiness and decrepitness of the action they're taking in life. And so
Hmm.
healthy life first starts with the body, healthy body, martial life. And of course, we happen to do, farming. We happen to do merchant activity. We happen to do these other things, but primarily we are what nature bred us to be, warriors and commanders first. So I hope I don't know if this is kind of just a shotgun, smear style thing going on. Maybe you can ask me what to expand on, but I think that was a good place to leave it there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, we worship aesthetically, not aesthetically. We don't worship sitting down quietly. We worship through physical exertion. We worship through pain. We worship through struggling. But we also worship through joy. We worship when we win a martial arts competition. You have your hand raised, and everybody's reveling in your glory. We worship through victory. We worship through being excellent, through attaining excellence, to pursuing perfection. It's something I mentioned, I think, on our last podcast in the Hagakure. They say seek perfection lifelong, knowing you'll never actually attain it. That is essentially, in a sense, what we're doing. We are not just living to finally be content the way that the bourgeois is. The bourgeois believes with enough money, with enough possessions, they will be satisfied, they will be complete. You see this in Fight Club where the narrator says, I almost created the perfect nest, the IKEA nesting instinct. He almost had all the perfect amount of clothes and perfect amount of furniture, whatever. The bourgeois seeks to be complete, but as Schopenhauer points out with the will to life, or even with the samsara in Buddhism, which he is inspired by to create this idea of will to life, man is never satisfied by the material. And of course, Schopenhauer's asceticist, and he thinks you just deny it all. But what we're saying is essentially what Nietzsche is saying: eternal recurrence. You are in a constant state of becoming. You are fire constantly burning, never to be extinguished, right? And in a sense, that's a sort of completion. We never want to be complete. We want to burn forever. That's almost like the Faustian ideal. You're constantly expanding. We are never going to be limited. The bourgeois seeks to be limited. The nation seeks to be limited. Oh, I have my borders. I'm good now. Internal colonization or whatever. No, you want to expand. If Earth is full, then we will expand elsewhere. We will expand to Mars. We will expand to the stars. We will expand beyond. Follow. We will follow until the ends of whatever. And if the universe is always expanding, then so shall we. We shall never stop. And that is
Boom.
exactly how we worship. So,
That's
yeah.
right. No, that's true. And it's through action, okay?
Hmm.
And I just can't emphasize this enough. Our vision is not merely the the call to arms is not just about it's not brought up to us about from the petty distinctions or considerations of the conflicts of our time, okay? These are just symptoms, okay? We have such a great mission, and that mission of expansion into the stars, into the universe, to make our faces known upon the earth's the different versions of earth that are out there across the universes itself in time and space. That is our calling, that is our mission. And to fall to egalitarianism and communism is death itself. Remember, when you have a heartbeat reading, you know how there are peaks and troughs when you have a heartbeat. Well, my friend, what happens when a person flatlines? They die, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, I hope people understand that our imperatives, well, they'll cause a lot of pain. In fact, it's not a bug; it's a feature. It's about actually embracing pain in a cathartic and constructive way. It's about avoiding euphoria that's not earned. So, false catharsis. It's about actually achieving great things and then, of course, getting the reward thereby. And it is through this internal spiritual, how do you say, dedication and imbuing it in our generation and generation after generation, and in our peers, our subordinates, and our superiors, that we're able to create a civilization which can go beyond simply Earth, or
Hmm.
at least it can create a segment of that society, of that human populace, that can do that as well, and leave all the rest to their rot. That is what I believe in. I believe, Elon Musk, as much as I kind of meme a little bit, I think he's a great guy because I think he's the only one considering the great plans of life, make the great missions of life, great self overcoming of going to Mars for the first time. Everyone else is focused about whether or not, a women's vagina is a bonus hole or whatever. And this guy is thinking, bro, like, why are you thinking about this stuff? Think
Uh-huh.
up. Look in the stars. Look how much further we can go, because so many people make this false dichotomy that they believe, oh, if we're doing physical expansion outwards, that somehow we are abandoning our internal state inside, and that we should fix what's inside before we can go outside. This
Hmm.
is a false dichotomy. You fix what's inside by straining to go out.
Yes.
You have to be good at fighting. So, for instance, to go out and fight and learn to fight is itself causing you, or calling to action for you, to go back and reflect and become a better person within. So it's actually counterintuitive, but you must go out so you can go further in. Everything that comes goes. Everything that goes comes back again. Right?
Hmm.
It's Heraclitus. It's the unity of opposites. And I'm tired of hearing people's false dichotomy, whether it's morality, for instance, talking about how killing is always wrong and whatever. It's bullshit, because ultimately this is why they turn into the decrepit souls that they are, is because they don't know that ultimately everything is a duality of opposites, right?
Hmm.
To be a good friend, you must be a terrible enemy.
Hmm.
You can't be everyone's friend and
Right.
be no one's enemy. There's no such thing. There's always conflict, and you always need to back your boy, or a boy or girl, whatever the fuck, your family. And I mean, extrapolate this further. I mean, look at energy, for instance. I mean, you just have to. There's always matter and dark matter. There is no such thing as infinite energy. There's always a fixed amount of heat. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And one must be taking heat and energy from others to give into yourself and those of your friends.
Yes.
Okay, and leftists know that, and I think this is something that people really need to understand, is that the leftist, like, pie in the sky, city of God type deal. The Christians started it, and then it was the communists and everyone. It's an illusion. It's a lie. Okay, my new Rome is not just this glittering utopia. It has blood, and people fuck, and they have kids, and they do everything that life does. It's real life. It's a real
Hmm.
Rome. It has stench, and it also has beauty. It has, like, the underworld and the overworld. It has 1,000 people in those dungeons that we mentioned earlier, and it has 1,000 higher ascended gods. The tree cannot grow up if it doesn't have deep roots down.
Yes.
My life, my beauty is that Rome is what it is in real life. And I think the thing is that people need to understand that when leftists are ever talking about something, they're lying to you. They're selling you bullshit. And that's why every time they succeed in swindling a country, whether it be Pol Pot or fucking Stalin, it ends up being that millions of people die, are raped, abused. All the things they promised would never happen, and what's worse, they gaslight you. So not only can they do the things that they promised they wouldn't do, but they give words opposite meanings, and they diminish you. So you're subjected to a double hell. The reality, the quote unquote horrible reality of life, which I believe is beautiful, is that life has tons of pain. It has tons of boredom. It has tons of X, Y, and Z. But because of that, it also has beauty. And
Hmm.
because of that, it also has catharsis. And because of that, it also has excellence. And so people really have to get over the dichotomy. There's no such thing as good and evil. There is only energy and beauty and the lack thereof. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And offense is the best defense. If you have 3 lines. You must concentrate multiple attacks on the weakest line and encircle your enemy and crush them. Defense never
Boom.
works. Always attack. Always go
That
forward.
run towards pain. Run
Indeed.
towards pain. Run towards pain. That's what I believe.
Exactly. It hurts less if you're ready for it and you go into it. You move into that strike. You take it. You roll with the punches. Accept it. It's going to happen. You're going to get hurt. So, just fucking exactly. Absolutely. And I
Based.
think that's a pretty good place, I think, to I know, like, we always promise we're going to talk about New Rome and then we end up talking about other things, but it's good. It keeps the anticipation. Now everyone's wondering, oh shit, I only know a little bit. Where's all the other knowledge? So we're keeping all of you. We're only giving you guys glimpses, because when it actually happens, when the flame turns into fire, it's going to go full steam ahead, and you're going to see exactly what it is. These are just the glimpses. These are little prophecies. Unfortunately, Lance and I couldn't afford to hire an Oracle of Delphi. There was a few options, but they were all really mid, and we were only trying to get a 10. So we're working on that. We're working on getting the funds together. But once we do that, you'll have someone else giving you these prophecies. But until then, Lance and I have to be the discount. We're like the seers,
That's right.
reading the entrails of the internet.
That's right. But it'll be in person as well, man.
Yes.
And like, as much as we joke, I'm like deadly serious.
Yes.
I think that it's important that you boys and girls that are listening understand that, like, you don't have to be a serious sourpuss all the time to be serious. I'm serious, and I love all y'all, and I love the mission. And I think the truth is that here's the thing: is that don't wait for orders. Start attacking on your own. Stop waiting for us to figure out things for you. Go out and explore and find those answers. We started just like you did. We were born in this morass, just like everyone else. Everyone was born in a liberal shithole. It's up to you to find the answers. We can point you the way, we can show you a sign, but you alone must tread that path. It's rugged and hard with jagged edges. You will bleed and you'll suffer, but at the end, there's something worth it. And slowly but surely, the path will be the reward itself.
Yes.
Okay? So I'll leave it at that, and I think that's a good way to end this segment for me.
Absolutely, and that's pretty much it for me as well. Seek victory. The one thing that's better in sex is defeating your enemies. Is what's that Genghis Khan thing? The greatest feeling
Oh,
in
yeah.
life is hearing the wails of. Wait, let me pull.
To conquer your enemy, to see him driven before you, to have his cattle and riches, and to hold close to your chest the crying wails of their wives and daughters. Yeah.
Based. So see, the means is a victory in itself. So anyway, we'll leave you all with that. We have a few more stuff that are coming up that we'll be talking about the project. So if this doesn't quite answer your questions, don't worry. You will receive more answers. You could also reach out to me. I'll be happy to I'm not going to give you the whole picture, but I will point you in the right direction. I'll give you the reading material before we have our reading list up. I'll give you like the little ways that you can prepare, but I will not give you the whole picture, because the whole picture will come out when it does, and when it does, it will hit the ground running and will not stop. So thanks for joining me, Lance, as usual. It's always good to have you on, and to the Legionaries, be prepared, because New Rome is coming. And as always, this is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the warrior philosophy. And we'll see you next time.